Thank you, Esra, for that heartfelt welcome to our panel on refugees overcoming humanitarian challenges. So long as we do not address the triggers or drivers of armed conflict and fragility, and so long as we do not invest in positive peace frameworks where we emphasize good governance, rule of law, equitable distribution of resources, inclusive economic policies, we will remain in the passenger seat, racing to provide the required protection and assistance to the most vulnerable in times of crises. Our panel this morning will focus on refugees. However, with more than 65 million individuals forcibly displaced from their homes, internally displaced persons or IDPs and asylum seekers are also in need of critical assistance. We have two distinguished keynote speakers, followed by an expert panel representing the private sector, the world of philanthropy, the United Nations High Commissioner of Refugees, as well as the Disaster and Emergency Management Presidency from the government of Turkey. I would like to invite our first keynote speaker, Mr. Faisal Al-Fayez, President of the Senate of Jordan, to provide his insight on the situation of Jordan as a host country.
Good morning to everyone. I will deliver my speech in Arabic. سعادة الرئيس، السيدات والسادة، بداية فإنه من دواعي سروري أن أتقدم بجزيل الشكر لسعادة الأمين العام لقمة البوسفور السيد جنكيز أوزفنسيل لإتاحة الفرصة لي للمشاركة في أعمال المؤتمر الثامن للقمة، مثمنا أيضا حرص الأمانة للمؤتمر على المشاركة الأردنية الدائمة فيها. كما أعبر عن اعتزازي بأن الرئيس الفخري للمؤتمر هو سعادة العين طلال أبو غزالة وسعادة العين حسن أبو نعمة من الأعضاء الفخريين لمجلس الإدارة، وهذا الأمر نابع من عمق العلاقات الأردنية التركية القائمة على الاحترام والمصالح المشتركة، وتعززها القيم والأهداف المشتركة لمستقبل آمن ومستقر لدول المنطقة وشعوبها. السيدات والسادة، موضوعنا يستعرض البعد الإنساني لقضية اللاجئين، ولست بحاجة هنا لتأكيد على أهمية هذه القضية التي تفاقمت خلال السنوات الماضية واستهدفت بلدنا بشكل مباشر. لهذا سأتحدث عن تجربتنا الأردنية والطريقة المثلى التي تعامل الأردن بها مع موجات اللجوء المتلاحقة على مدى أكثر من 7 عقود من تاريخنا. لقد استقبل الأردن منذ استقلاله أول موجة من اللاجئين من فلسطين بعد حرب عام 1948، تلتها موجة ثانية بعد حرب 1967، ثم موجة ثالثة من الفلسطينيين العاملين في الخليج عقب حرب الخليج الأولى عام 1991. وفي نفس الوقت استقبلنا أكثر من 1,000,000 لاجئ عراقي لجأوا إلينا بسبب هذه الحرب. ونتيجة الحروب والأزمات المتلاحقة في منطقتنا استمر الأردن مقصدا رئيسيا للاجئين لما يتمتع به من أمن واستقرار، وبما عرف عنه من معاملة كريمة وإنسانية لكافة اللاجئين إليه قاصدين السلامة والأمان مهما كان عرقهم أو دينهم أو بلدهم. وهو يستقبل اليوم بسبب الأزمة السورية حوالي 1,300,000 لاجئ سوري، وهؤلاء وحدهم يشكلون ربع عدد سكان المملكة الأردنية الهاشمية. أقول لكم وبكل اعتزاز إننا في الأردن حكومة وشعبا منذ البداية تعاملنا مع اللاجئين بما يحفظ لهم كرامتهم ويؤمن احتياجاتهم المعيشية والصحية والتعليمية، شأنهم في ذلك شأن المواطن الأردني، بالرغم من شح الموارد الطبيعية والنقص الهائل في المساعدات الدولية، بل وانقطاعها أحيانا كثيرة رغم قلتها. والأهم من ذلك إن ما شكله التواجد الكثيف لأفواج اللاجئين المفاجئ أحيانا والضغوط الناجمة عن ذلك على مواردنا المحدودة ومختلف الخدمات والبنى التحتية لم يولد لدينا اتجاههم أي ردود فعل سلبية أو غير إنسانية، كما شاهدنا وشاهدتم معنا من ردود الفعل والذعر التي انتابت غالبية الدول الغربية. إذن لم تكن لدينا جوانب تقصير أو تراجع عن دورنا الأخلاقي والإنساني تجاه مجتمع اللاجئين. منذ أول موجة لجوء تقاسم الأردنيين معهم الماء والطعام والسكن والعمل، وقدمنا لهم كافة الحاجات الإنسانية بكل تفاصيلها، وإن كان ذلك على حساب حياة المواطن الأردني ومعيشته. ولأنني أتحدث إليكم حول واقع اللجوء وأثره على الأردن، فإن ما نعاني منه اليوم بسبب أعداء اللجوء السوري هي تلك التحديات الاقتصادية والأمنية. فكما ذكرت بداية، تلقينا مساعدات من المنظمات الدولية وبعض الدول الصديقة والشقيقة والمؤسسات المعنية بشؤون اللاجئين، لكنها للأسف لم تغطي إلا جزءاً يسيراً من المطلوب. لقد بلغ إنفاقنا على اللاجئين السوريين أكثر من 10 مليارات دولار حتى اليوم، ما أدى لرفع المديونية الأردنية لمستويات خطيرة، وارتفعت نسب الفقر والبطالة، ولا زال الإنفاق عليهم مستمرا، وللأسف ما زال تقصير المجتمع الدولي مستمرا أيضا. ولكن رغم الضغوطات الأمنية والاقتصادية التي تواجهنا بسبب أعباء اللجوء، استمرينا بدورنا الإنساني ولم نفكر لحظة في إغلاق حدودنا أو عرقلة وصول طالبي النجاة. وبخصوص التداعيات الأمنية المترتبة على اللجوء في بلدنا، وأشير هنا إلى خطورة هذا البعد، فطول حدودنا مع العراق وسوريا حوالي 700 كيلومتر، ولهذا فإنكم تدركون إمكانية تسلل العناصر الإرهابية والمهربين وغيرهم من المجرمين والخارجين على القانون مع جموع اللاجئين. وقد سجلت حوادث كثيرة واستشهد عدد من جنودنا خلال أداء مهامهم الإنسانية والأمنية. لقد ترتب على حماية حدودنا ورقابتها على مدى السنوات الماضية جهود كبيرة وهائلة، ورافق ذلك ضغط كبير على موازنة الدولة المالية، حيث وصلت مديونية الأردن اليوم حوالي 35 مليار دولار. لذلك ونحن الساحة الرئيسية لمشكلة اللاجئين، وبسببها أصبح الأردن أكبر دولة مستقبلة للاجئين، وذلك بالنسبة لعدد السكان والمهجرين من بلدانهم. فإننا نطالب المجتمع الدولي وكافة الجهات المانحة بالالتزام بدعمنا لتمكيننا من مواجهة التحديات التي نعاني منها. وعلى المجتمع الدولي الإنساني أن يعي ويدرك بأن هذا الدعم واجب عليه وليس منا. فالأردن ليس من أوجد الأزمة السورية، فليرانا نتحمل وحدنا مسؤولية اللاجئين والأعباء المترتبة عليهم. وأقولها بصوت عال إن عبارات الإشادة بدورنا والتعاطف معنا لم تعد تجدي نفعا، وإن المجتمع الدولي عليه أن يدرك بأن دعم الأردن واستقراره هو حيوي لاستقرار المنطقة بأسره. كما أنه في الوقت الذي نطالب فيه المجتمع الدولي تحمل مسؤولياته تجاه الأردن، فإننا نطالبه أيضا بجهود حقيقية لمعالجة الظروف التي فرضت على المواطنين الآمنين ودفعتهم للتخلي عن مدنهم وقراهم ومنازلهم بحثاً عن النجاة والأمن في بلدان أخرى. لقد آن الأوان أن تحظى مشكلة اللاجئين بالاهتمام الدولي الفاعل لوضع حد لها ولمحاماة الدول المستضيفة لهم، وشكرا لكم على الاستماع.
Thank you, Mr. Al-Fayez, for your insightful speech. Now may I kindly invite Mr. Artini to present a plaque of honor to Mr. Al-Fayez.
Thank you. We'll go ahead and jump into our panel as we wait for the minister to arrive. I'd like to start with Mr. Artini from UNHCR. The humanitarian crisis that was precipitated by the armed conflict in Syria has once again highlighted the need to synergize humanitarian assistance and development aid. How has UNHCR provided its response with regards to this requirement?
Thank you. And let me thank the organizers for this opportunity to be here. It's very good to speak about refugees. And I'd like to congratulate the summit for featuring so strongly the refugee issue. And as you mentioned, Christina, the world is a world of increasing mobility. And we are reaching a record forced displacement in the world. We are approaching more or less 66 million forcibly displaced people in the world, and many of them are refugees. 17 million refugees are under the responsibility of UNHCR. And this is due to a combination of factors. There are very much protracted crises, old crises that are not addressed, and there are fresh crises that are coming every year. And the Syria crisis is one clear example. Let's think about 11 million people who had were forced to leave their homes. 11 million people is a country, like the total population of Belgium. And many are hosted in the region. We heard from the Keynote Speaker of Jordan. The great majority are hosted in the region by Turkey. More than 3 million refugees. And what is often forgotten is that most refugees are actually hosted by low-income countries and middle-income countries. And what the experience has shown is that the response to mass influxes of refugees is inadequate. It's inadequate, as we all know, because the root causes of mass displacement have not been addressed. The international community finds more and more difficult to prevent conflicts, to solve conflict, to contain conflict. But it's also inadequate in terms of the response. To find a predictable way to respond to these mass influences, as the experience has shown in the past years. Now, as you mentioned, when referring to the fact that we are passengers, we humanitarians, the humanitarian community is dealing with the consequences of this crisis, with if you wish, the symptoms of the crisis. But things are happening, and a lot can be done. One thing which is very important, which happened last year in September, is the New York Declaration. The New York Declaration was adopted, by member states of the United Nations. It's really a milestone of international solidarity and international protection. It contains very clear commitment. It is a declaration. And the first commitment is to provide this predictable and sustainable way to help refugees. And not only that, it has started a process, and UNHCR has been tasked to develop a global compact on refugees with all the stakeholders, with states, with civil society, with advocacy groups, with academics to really develop a global compact, a global agreement about refugees, which can provide this comprehensive response. And if you look at the objective of the New York Declaration, these are very simple: to ease, for instance, the pressure on the host countries closer to the crisis areas, such as this region, and to help in terms of the self-reliance of refugees. You mentioned development. Yes, development actors, according to this comprehensive response, should come in at the beginning of the crisis, not just to pick up the pieces at the end of the crisis. Now, I know all of this sounds a bit theoretical and abstract, but let me move to the example of Turkey, which I think is better to look at what is surrounding us. As it was mentioned, Turkey is the country with most refugees in the world, actually, and for the third consecutive year. You mentioned the Syria crisis, but there are also refugees from other crisis areas surrounding Turkey. And from the very beginning, the Turkey response has been very strong in terms of establishing a legal framework for the protection and for the assistance of refugees. But also, Turkey has understood very well that with this size of the population, the only way to provide for them is to develop policies to include them in the national mechanism. I'm talking about schools, about education, about health, about social welfare. So this is quite important. Of course, as it was mentioned also before, there are many challenges due to the size of the population, which is also a population that is scattered all over Turkey. It's not only a minority in camps, less than 10% are in camps, but the others are living side by side with the host community all over Turkey. And with a population that is becoming increasingly vulnerable because they are also depleting their savings and so on. So I think the challenge now is to really support now refugees to become more self-reliant, to have access to jobs, to have access to livelihood. Let me just mention one concrete example, because I think we are all involved in this, which is the way the United Nations and UNHCR supports a refugee response, not only in Turkey, but in the region. And this is through a plan that is called the Refugee and Resilience Response Plan, the so-called 3R, the Refugee and Resilience Response, that makes this link between humanitarian aid, the refugee dimension, and the development dimension, the self-reliance. So this plan is quite important, it's quite innovative, if you wish, because there were a lot of talks also during the World Humanitarian Summit, which took place here in Istanbul, about a new way of working. And this is a reflection of a new way of working all together to provide a comprehensive response, and is an example, actually, which can be very useful in developing this global contract. It can be useful also for other realities. Now, in terms of how do we help people to become more independent, I think, and I'm very proud to be in this panel and with this crowd, I think we should all be involved. The authorities, of course, the Ministry of Labor, the employment agencies, all who are working, including UNHCR, the Refugee Agency, in providing vocational training for refugees. The refugees themselves who are establishing businesses. There have been 6,500 businesses, owned by refugees. But let me just finish by saying that the private sector, the business actors, can really play a role. Not only in terms of providing financial contributions and in terms of providing jobs, but really through these work, they can really influence the discourse on refugees, that can show that in practice refugees want to participate actively in the society because they can participate actively, so they can really transform the lives of refugees. Not only transforming the lives of refugees, transform also our lives. And it can only be in a positive manner, as many examples here.
Thank you. Dr. Güllüoğlu, can we build on Ms. Artini's comments? How has the government of Turkey synthesized development or humanitarian response, humanitarian assistance, food development aid, both as a country which is engaged in crises abroad, but also with regards to the impact of Syrian humanitarian crisis here in Turkey.
Thanks, Christina. But in this humanitarian and development aid, there are some really technical things. But I know that in the room there are some people from outside the humanitarian sector. That's why, first of all, just to get an idea, who is refugee or who is hosting community, who is these vulnerable people. I don't want to use the word empathy, but just to give an idea. For 3 million people, we know that more than 3 million people are in Turkey. More than 3 million Syrians are in Turkey. But when we look at their personal stories, how they came to Turkey, I don't know how many Syrian families I met, but none of them, they just said that when the war started, we decided to go to Turkey. I mean, they have real reasons, they have real causes. By the way, our sector, humanitarian sector, mainly humanitarian sector, is between life and death. It's not like any other sector, maybe for medicine, but more than medicine, it's between life and death. Because what we are dealing is with conflict, with real weapons, not just in documents, not just in articles. We are dealing with bombs, chemical bombs. I mean, Europe, for example, didn't see, I hope they don't see, more than after Second World War, none of chemical weapons. But in this region, we treated, unfortunately again, we treated chemical weapons victims. First of all, they became, especially Syrians, they became IDPs, or refugees in Somalia, refugees in other parts of the world. First they became IDPs. From one village to another village, from one city to another city, they changed their places. It starts, I mean, their story starts from here. What does it mean for changing a place? It's not just going for a vacation, going for a holiday for 1 week. It's changing for all life, for your school, for your street, for your market that you shop, everything changes. I mean, your all life standards change. And then after a couple of being displaced, you become refugee and they came to the Turkey. I think just a break may be fine. And then humanitarian activity starts. I mean, in Turkey, in Jordan, in Lebanon, inside Syria, the humanitarian activity starts. But first of all, really, we should have an idea, who are these people? I mean, in humanitarian activities and the development activities, we can say that in short term and in the emergency phase, we should give shelter, we should give food, we should support the main basic health services as the first humanitarian activities. And then development activities starts. But what in Turkey we are trying to do, not only limited with the Syrian refugees, in Somalia case, in other cases, what Turkey is trying to help in Palestine, and I think the distinguished participant from Jordan is very right, because before Syria crisis, Palestine refugees was the crowded number in different countries, in Lebanon, in Jordan, inside the Palestine, in Egypt. They were most crowded refugee population in all around the world. But unfortunately, I mean, the crises competing in each other. That's why, unfortunately, again, I will use unfortunately word, I think, a lot, but for the shame of the humanity, in the last decades, we are competing the crisis, which crisis is worse than the others. That's why Syria crisis, much more we are talking. But when the development activity starts, it means much more education, much more training, much more investment in technical support, investment for business, investment for infrastructure, it comes. But first of all, I think not only limited with Syria cases, with Somalia case also, one of the things we should discuss is how is the current system is working? Is there any defects of the system? And is there anything we should discuss for that? What Turkey is offering is, if there is gap or if there are any hard lines between humanitarian aid and development aid, I think it also creates some wasting money and wasting time. In Somalia, for example, from the first days
just after first days in 2011, Turkey started to build hospitals. Turkey started to build schools. Turkey started to support for training Somali people, for rebuilding Somalia again. For Syria cases, by the way, when we call refugees, there are different reasons for refugees. There are different root causes for the refugees. Of course, conflict. Forced to be displacement, number one is conflict. What's happening in Syria, what's happening in Afghanistan or Iraq, mainly conflicts. But second, as the big group of the reason to be refugee is droughts, disasters. In Somalia case, droughts, but in Syria cases, it is conflict. What we should discuss is really, as the participants from Jordan also mentioned, what is the situation? It is affecting the region and it's affecting globe. That's why from different perspectives, from different sectors, and also from different countries, one of the, I think, critical questions what I will be keeping on asking, first, Europe is affected also from Syria crisis. But when it started? When this European refugee crisis started? Did it started that when the baby island and the flood of people started to go in 2015? Or did it started when the first refugees started to come in Turkey in 2011? That's why if you look at the globe as a real one globe, and if you look at these humanitarian crises, not only some crises which is happening in far away, and as person, as individual, as my community, as my country, we can do or not, it depends on me, this crisis will be continuing. And for the relation between, as the maybe last words, for the relation between humanitarian activities and development activities, we cannot think them different than each other. They should be cooperated. And while we are investing, unfortunately, humanitarian sector and development sector is not big as like cosmetic sector or like any other sectors, any other known sectors. I'm not even comparing weapon sector or medicine sector or energy sector. Other sectors you cannot compare. That's why our money is very limited. And while we are spending on humanitarian sector and development sector, our efficacy should be very high, and they are not separated in each other.
Great, thank you. Mr. Jafar, if I may turn to you, how do we ensure that refugees are not forced into adopting negative coping mechanisms like using up all of their savings or working in poor working conditions?
So I would like to start with a totally different thought that I already had in my mind. So if you allow me, and since you had encouraged us for this to be more of an interactive panel, so I'll take the liberty and do question a few things. Because I remember from yesterday's talk, His Excellency Al-Fayez pointed out a few very important issues about performance of UN, and UNHCR is one of the most effective organizations out of UN, and I was sharing that with Paolo. But there are causes and there are symptoms. At times I feel I'm sitting with an espresso cup in a big ship, taking some water out of the ship, while somebody's drilling the hole in the ship. So we do need to address the causes as well. What's causing these refugee crises repeatedly? His Excellency Faisal mentioned that Jordan has been the home for refugees from the Arab world. And this is really commendable because every time historically we see there are crises, Jordan has always opened its arms and boundaries to all the region. But until unless we go back today, getting ready to start questioning the status quo on the cause, I think we will never find a solution. So that's my thought I thought I'll share with you on that. I also thought that, I'll share a few other facts that we are trying to remember is refugees also not just coming in for a year or 2 years. An average stay of a refugee is about 17 years in any country. That's 17 years, and we have over 60 million recognized refugees. Some figures are 65, some are 60, and more than 1/3 of them could be school going. And we don't have education for more than half of those children at least. So you're going to look at a population growing on for the next 17 years with no education, gone through major trauma, And if they turn out to be people who are not good for society, I don't know who to blame then. So we do need to look at these facts that are coming along. The thing that I see most long-term is the problem with education. But mid-term, there are no jobs. We were talking about it yesterday with Paolo. I think some changes are being made, but out of millions of people, only 2,000 people got the permission to have jobs, or what was the figure? I forgot.
30,000.
Sorry?
So 30,000.
30,000, and out of how many? Approximate potential people who can have a job?
In Turkey, the estimated working age population is 1.5 million.
So if we say out of 1.5 million, with all these efforts in such a long time, we've managed to get about 30,000 jobs. So these refugees, they lose their life overnight. From being engineers, doctors, and business people, they come back and they get a very small amount. Paolo, could you just correct me on this? Is it 200-300 euros a month or something like that? What is the exact amount that the refugees get for?
The assistance goes to
the country.
The assistance goes to the most vulnerable, of course.
And
the amount
how much is there any per capita amount that goes in there?
And it's about 100
100? 120 euros. So you can imagine a doctor who overnight lost his job in Syria, comes to a refugee camp, and his family gets 120 euros for a month. So all these facts that we are facing are truly going to make us all pay the price in the long run. So I would like to go back to Christina's question. Could you just repeat the crux of your question so I can give you a pointed answer to that?
Or how do we ensure refugees are not forced to adopt negative coping mechanisms? What is the enabling environment that is required to ensure that they are able to live a life of dignity, of resilience?
To give them normalcy in life is very important, to take care of day-to-day issues, including education, including giving them job opportunities. But the good thing is entrepreneurship is being encouraged. If we have mechanism where we could do some for-profit social funding, where we can give them a small capital to start businesses, all these things will make a very big difference. But an urgent issue to look at, because I work on Goal 8 of UN Sustainable Goal through the foundation called Global Sustainability Network, GSN, which includes faith, governments, businesses, non-profits, and media working together to achieve Goal 8. Our focus on Goal 8 is ending modern-day slavery, education for employment, look at youth unemployment, job creation, things like these. So relevant to Goal 8, one of the biggest problems we see in refugee camps is selling and buying of little children for a few hundred euros. Little girls from the ages of 6 to 13 are being sold and bought. So things like these are, if law enforcement, if countries, if a humanitarian organization put in a bit more effort on it, it could make a very big difference.
I think we have just time for one comment, and then we will turn to our keynote speaker.
Just for the remark about the Syrians, if they live in refugee camps or not. In Jordan, for example, 1.1 million Syrian refugees live in Jordanian cities, and they compete with the Jordanians over the question of employment. So imagine this. About 200, maybe 1,000 live in refugee camps, but the rest of them, 1.1, live in Jordanian cities. So this is a heavy burden on the Jordanian economy. So this is only to, to answer your remark about what they are doing.
And I think Jordan is one of the only countries that has allowed this, or how many countries are there that have allowed people to come in at that percentage of the population and have the normal job?
Well, as I mentioned also in Turkey, the great majority of refugees are living in urban centers, only a minority live in camps. In camps they are fully assisted, and the others, the most vulnerable, are benefit of scheme. One is the ESSN scheme, benefiting of some subsidies, which have, because this is very important, to be in line with what the vulnerable segments of the host community receive.
Mr. Amersi, if I may turn to you. This morning we have heard quite a bit about the importance of education as a key component for an enabling environment for refugee resilience. Could you kindly tell us about your experience, especially visiting formal refugee camps, and the importance that education poses?
Thank you very much. Let me begin by firstly thanking the organizers for a magnificent conference here, and in particular to Esra for the work of the Maya Wakfi Foundation, which I had the privilege to visit on Monday. Well done, Esra. It's great to see your work. I think I will keep my remarks short. So what I would like to do is to say that I've had the privilege of visiting refugee camps in Jordan, in Syria, in Greece, in Germany, and in Belgium, in connection with the work of my own foundation, but also as a board member of various other charities, including Mosaic, the Prince of Wales's Princess Trust International, and a number of other initiatives. And these visits have been both a learning and an education for myself, and also, I hope, an education for, or an education that needs to be implanted in the minds of these young children that I have come across. So, in order to keep my remarks short, let me just highlight 7 one-liner aphorisms that I have taken away from my visits, and I hope that they will also color the education that is being provided. Firstly, I feel that it is easy to form a child than to repair an adult. So that is very important. Secondly, that the power of love and compassion will finally prevail over the love of power and hatred. Thirdly, and this is a point that our Jordanian colleague made very forcefully today, that all of these facilities are so poorly funded. So that brought me to think that there was once a man who was so poor, the only thing he had was money. And this is a lesson that should really be learned by all the rich neighbors that surround Syria and elsewhere. That, if you really want to be rich, it's not only about money, it's much more than money. I also found that he that has read only one book is very dangerous. And that is something that curriculum and culture and ethnicity should definitely focus on. On program sustainability, I took the Chinese proverb that if you want to plant for 1 year, you plant rice, and if you want to plant for more than 10 years, you plant a tree. If you look at what Esra has done with the Maya Wakfi Foundation, it's symbolic, and it demonstrates, I think, a point that it is not hope alone that gives rise to action, but it is positive action that ultimately will give rise to hope. And the other point that I learned is that peace is not only the mere absence of war, but it is the active pursuit of morality. So these are 7 key lessons that I took away from my visits. Now for a couple of lines of some very grim statistics. As of today, about 91% of all children of primary age are in primary schools globally. But if you look at the refugee situation, this number drops to 61%, and then if you look at the low-income countries, it drops to 50%, which is bad, but it is still manageable. When you look at secondary education, the numbers are starting to look grim. The numbers are 84% of all secondary age children are in secondary education globally, but in refugee environments only 23%, and in low income only 9%. And then when you look at university or tertiary education, it's very bad. 36% globally of all children are in universities, but in refugee environments, the percentage drops to only 1%. So what are the 7 key lessons that I took away from my visits and the work that we have done? Firstly, we need adequate funding for schools and universities. This is obvious. Secondly, I found that technology has not been used to the extent that it can be used. The power of a technology should be used to deliver education that is affordable, customized, and scalable. Thirdly, there is no point in educating unless you can help these people to find jobs. So vocational education is absolutely fundamental. Then I find that one of the key gaps is the curriculum issue. Now imagine that you have 2 million, as we heard, Syrian refugees here in Turkey. What curriculum are they going to be taught? Is it the Turkish curriculum, or is it the Syrian curriculum, or is it a hybrid? And unless this issue is addressed carefully, and not only for Turkey alone, but Turkey, Lebanon, Syria, Greece, all the people that are dealing with Syrian refugee issues, it is going to become a challenge, because ultimately the hope is that these young kids will grow up. 17 years is the average that they stay in exile, if I may use that word. And after that, hope is that they will return back to an inclusive and peaceful Syria. But if that happens, what education system is going to allow them to be recognized when they get back home? And are they going to be able to find jobs easily or not? So the question of addressing the right curriculum is very important. Linked to that is the question of the language. Are they going to be taught in Turkish, in Arabic, in English, or in French? The experience in Lebanon is that it's mainly Arabic and French. In Turkey, I'm sure it's Arabic and Turkish. In other countries, it's different. So this is what I would urge the multinational bodies like the UN to address, and to devise a curriculum that can be used right across the board so that people are not disadvantaged. The other point is, if you look at the demographics, there are a large number of Syrian teachers who have got teaching qualifications from back home, but unfortunately they're not being allowed to get permits where that they can teach their own fellow children from their own country. So this is again a question that has to be addressed. These Syrian teachers have to be accredited with the education system, whether it is in Jordan or Turkey or Lebanon or anywhere, and allowed to be able to teach, because this then serves 2 purposes. And the final takeaway that I came from is that so much of jobs and so much of higher education is focused on being able to provide a transcript of what you have done in your primary and your high schools. And so unless the transcript exists, nobody's going to know what you've actually done during your exile period. So if the transcripts are not easy to obtain, then I think the system, when you're devising a new curriculum, has to shift from transcripts to tests which can be recognized everywhere, so that again the exile years are not lost years. So those are my few remarks. Thank you very much.
We have time for 2 or 3 questions from the audience. If you could kindly introduce yourself, keep your questions, comments short. Thank you. Please. I believe there should be a microphone here on the side.
Hello. My name is Hussam Abu Isa. I'm from Qatar. With due respect to the efforts done by all the NGOs for the refugees, I think we should know what are the causes of refugees. We are always forecasting growth of refugees. We are not forecasting the reduction of refugees. Today, what are the causes of refugees? Is it a struggle of power over the world, trying to control the world, and mostly the military spending on the world. Are we aware that the world is spending more than $2 trillion on military equipment and services versus helping the refugees with $100 or $200 billion a year? Therefore, the world industry of military is helping to cause refugees while nobody's addressing it to reduce. If you reduce 10%, 15% of military spending worldwide of the $2 trillion, which is almost 5 to 6% of the world GDP, can you imagine how much we can save in terms of refugees, agony, disasters around the world? So we should find NGOs or some work with the United Nations to be able to reduce military spending and take this money and put it in good deed works, rather than every year we have growth in military spending, which means growth in refugees and growth in world misery. Thank you.
Thank you. I think Mr. Amersi would like to take that call.
I'm sure that Paolo will have more to add here than I would. The only statistic I would like to articulate is that the world spends $1.6 trillion on arms sales annually. If you are able to reduce only 10% of that, I'm convinced that that money alone can deal with a lot of the refugee issues that we face today.
Absolutely. Reducing the root causes of conflicts is key. The High Commissioner Filippo Grandi addressed the Security Council exactly making this point. Where is the capacity of the international community to really solve conflicts? It seems that capacity has been declining. So the point is very important. Perhaps since the discussion was very interesting, just to add a couple of points, because I think education and livelihoods came up as key issues, no? And I really benefited of your wisdom about the fact that we are shaping children and there should be no lost generation in this sense. But also in terms of jobs, no? I think we want to all to plant a tree rather than give out rice. For instance, in terms of the work permits in Turkey, the procedure is triggered by the employers. So the more jobs and more opportunities the employers and the business actors will give to refugees, the more these possibilities of livelihoods will be enhanced. And then one point about the language and the higher education. It's very important that refugees continue their education, as is the case, for instance, in Turkey. And speaking with some students who benefited of scholarship here in Turkey, they learned Turkish very well, but they had a big wish and desire to use their studies also to contribute to their country once the conditions in safety and dignity will be there to return to Syria. So I think these higher education aspects are also very important.
Sorry.
Please.
I would actually totally support Mr. Abu Issa's concern, because this goes back to looking at the cause, not only the symptoms, but the famous saying in the story we all must have read in our childhood, who's going to bell the cat? So I think which division, which NGO, who's going to go forward?
You know, I'm going to answer your question with another question. Who is arming? You know, the 5 members of the Security Council are the largest producers of weapons, in addition to some other countries. Thank you very much.
In fact, I will also complete this one. As the humanitarians, as the NGOs, as the humanitarian organizations of the government, as UN agencies, we are competing with some other sectors like army sector, like people sector and army sector. That's why I think also advocacy for the humanitarian issues, advocacy for the needy people, and how to affect the policymakers, how to affect the private sector is very important and unfortunately crucial for our area. Otherwise, if we cannot find money, we cannot respond, we cannot really support those needy people. That's why the point is very important, but I think even for this question, we should, I don't know how many months or weeks we should discuss, Otherwise, the policymakers go on what they know and how they do. The military sector goes on what they do. But at the end, the individuals, the babies, the elderly people keep going on dying.
Well, thank you for joining us this morning. Thank you also for your flexibility with regards to the timing of the session. We identified that there is an urgency to address the triggers of armed conflicts and fragility, but as our panelists just reiterated, without investing in positive peace paradigms or positive peace frameworks, we will remain to see this cyclical cycle continue. Thank you for joining us, and we hope that they continue the discussion after the panel.
Thank you to our moderator, Ms. Bache, and our panelists for the interesting presentations. Now may I kindly invite Ms. Özsüer to present a plaque of honor to our distinguished speakers. Ms. Özsüer. Esra Hanım'ı sahneye davet etmek istiyorum tekrardan. Can I keep it there for a second? Esra Hanım, buyurun lütfen. Esra Hanım konuşmacılarımıza plaketlerini takdim edecekler. Miss Bache, can we keep you here for a second? Thank you.